Good evening. I'm Anthony Spano. We're here with Spanning the Need. I'm here with Brian Corbin, the Executive Vice President of Catholic Charities USA. How you doing tonight, Brian?
Very good, Anthony. How about yourself? Thanks
It's
for inviting me.
good. It's always great to have a face that's a friendly face.
Thank you.
It's Memorial Day weekend coming up, so a lot of people are going to be out. The weather's looking great. But we have some important things to talk about right now, about
Sure.
what's going on and how everything is panning out on a country basis. So we talk a little bit about what's going on in the world or in the United States, as well as what are some of the things going on that we're unaware of and what's kind of happening behind the scenes in a variety of different things.
Mm-hmm.
So Brian, before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've gone, where you've been, and how you got to where you are now and how you started.
Well, okay. Well, in a brief kind of way, I'm from the state of Maine originally, and I started my ministry in Catholic Charities when I was 16 years old. I was appointed to the State Catholic Charities of Maine Board of Directors, and that hooked me in. There's a long story behind that, but as a 16-year-old, I didn't know much about what was going on, but something was happening, and I was led to be a member of that board for 2 years, my final 2 years of high school, and that changed my whole trajectory. So it really helped me understand what I wanted to study in college. And ultimately, when I finished grad school, I decided I wanted to work for the church and went away, and I applied for a job in Youngstown, Ohio, in Catholic Charities as a diocesan director. And next thing you know, 27 years I served in Catholic Charities in Youngstown, and for the past 6 years, I've been at the national headquarters of Catholic Charities USA in Alexandria, Virginia.
For the record, we knew each other back in Youngstown. We
Yep.
served on a variety of committees,
Exactly.
and we did a lot of great things.
Absolutely.
And so it becomes more of, we've known each other for a long time. We've been in the nonprofit sector, and we've done a variety of things just in the community alone. But I think what people don't realize is what goes on behind the scenes that people don't realize. What goes on in a variety of different ways that a nonprofit can serve a community.
Sure.
And so give us an overview of what Catholic Charities USA does. Not many people may look at the local level and see what it does, but how does a big Catholic Charities USA look like, and what goes on behind the scenes?
Sure. So Catholic Charities USA was founded 110 years ago. We have 166 members. So we have members or dioceses, basically. So Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Youngstown is a member of Catholic Charities USA. And so we're a membership organization where we help them deal issues of public policy, disaster operations, which I think we'll talk about in a moment, helping them with programs, helping them access federal grants and contracts, helping them access large national philanthropies. So our job is to support the 166 primary Catholic Charities agencies serving dioceses. So that spans the entire United States and its territories. So we have Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Marshall Islands, Guam, and that way we are that collection of Catholic charities for the entire country. We are also designated by the U.S. Catholic bishops as the official domestic disaster responder for the United States for the Catholic Church. Catholic Relief Services, our sister corporation based in Baltimore, is the international disaster operations. So we divide the turf by international and domestic.
And that's a good thing. And explain a little bit about what the disaster relief really is, because people may think that when you have a hurricane, so that would be like if you have a hurricane or you have any type of tornado, Catholic Charities, local or national, would come in and help with like a FEMA and stuff like that.
Right. So basically, we're mostly known for natural disasters, a flood, a tornado, like exactly what you said. Like there's a big flood going on in Michigan right now.
Remember, are you guys on the ground over there?
Well, there's a social ministries office for the Diocese of Saginaw. We've offered our help to them. Most recently on Easter Sunday, if people remember, there were several tornadoes that ripped through the southeast United States, and our Catholic Charities agencies were one of the early responders and continue. So in a disaster, you have to think of an arc. The arc is immediate needs. So we're not EMTs and we're not firemen and we're not police officers, but we're right behind it. So we're called first responders. So what with the Red Cross, with Lutheran Social Services, with Mennonite community, we are right there right after a disaster to help people. So our national office will call our local office, ask them what they need, and give them resources and help them make connections with other nonprofits through a group called VOAD, which is nonprofit organizations that are involved in disaster, active in disaster. It's called Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, VOAD. And we coordinate with FEMA at the national level and help our locals. So there's the immediate need. There's the short-term help. Short-term is about 90 days, like 3 months. Then there's the long-term recovery. So after a tornado, after 90 days, there's still houses to be built.
Exactly.
So that can take up to 5 to 6 years. So that's called long-term recovery. And then ultimately, the fourth step is called resiliency. How then do we build the community back up again, or using our agencies with the civic community, the governmental community, the philanthropic community? How can we rebuild ourselves to think about what happens when the next disaster happens? And lo and behold, it might not be a tornado. It might be COVID.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point that you say. Is right now we're looking at a very big pandemic right now, COVID-19, and this is on everyone's mind. You have people that have lost their jobs, they've furloughed, they've been laid off. I mean, the unemployment numbers came out, 25 million people. So you're running into a very big issue in a pandemic, and I would assume, and from what you said, you guys are at the front lines.
Sure. So even just to be even more precise, Anthony, today was 2.5 million more people last week filed unemployment. We're now up to 38 million.
Wow. And
that's in the United States. And that's pretty phenomenal. That is devastatingly phenomenal. So yes, so Catholic Charities agencies, along with many other nonprofits, but certainly Catholic Charities, we've pivoted to a couple things. One is massive food distribution. People don't have enough money for food right now. They're either waiting for an unemployment insurance claim, or they're burning their money quickly. Didn't expect to be gone for 3 months to 2 months, and who knows what's next. So a lot of our Catholic Charities agencies have done some amazing work in pivoting toward food. The second major pivot is helping with those who are very vulnerable populations. We have a lot of Catholic nursing homes, a lot of Catholic residences for special needs persons and persons with their needs. So how do we keep them safe? How do we help them? Then we've also pivoted to a lot of people who need some mental health help. So telemedicine, and working very hard to help people access their mental health capacities. And so those are the three major areas that we've kind of pivoted in as much as many other things. The fourth thing that we've really done is advocacy here in Washington on behalf of the nonprofit sector and Catholic Charities specifically, but the nonprofit in general. We work with a group called Leadership 18, which we're a member of. That's the group of about the large institutions that you think of: United Way, boys clubs, YMCAs, YWCAs, Catholic Charities. We work with them very closely to promote what the needs are of the nonprofit sector on Capitol Hill and with the administration. So that's one of the fourth major areas that we really pivoted to.
Well, and I think we look at it this way, and a lot of nonprofits are hurting. And what's going to come out of this? We don't know. I mean, you have all the big ones that may have the resources, but then you have a lot of the smaller ones trying to do the best they can.
Absolutely.
With this pandemic, it's also come to people that are now giving back more than ever. And it's kind of for the last 10 weeks. And the government just passed Cares Act 2.0, and I think they're on Cares Act 5 right now.
They will be, yeah.
Yeah. So we know the Cares Act came up with the PPP, which is the Payment Protection Program through the SBA, and the SBA had its own EDLI, all these initials.
Exactly. Emergency Disaster Loan. Exactly.
Right. So how has these grants or loans help the nonprofits, and really how can someone that is a small nonprofit apply? Because from what I'm getting is there's still available money in the PPP. So how can someone go about it, and what do they need to know about it?
Sure. A couple things. One is, so first of all, it's for the SBA was always set up for small businesses. Mostly we think of those businesses as for-profit companies. Because of the nature of the pandemic, Congress allowed nonprofits for the first time to access this program. So it's really driven for the for-profit sector, which is an incredible need there as well. But if you're a nonprofit and you have under 500 employees, I'll just make it real simple, under 500 employees, you can actually apply for monies to help keep your employees in place. And what's the formula? The formula is you take an average monthly payroll and you times it by 2.5, and that's your number. That's what you get. So it's a very simple mathematical equation. You have to show that you've had some crisis. You have to show that you don't have millions of dollars in the bank waiting to be spent.
Or reserves.
Or just some kind of way to show that you've had some crisis, right? That you're having a hard time in this moment. And that's okay. They're not asking for a high level. They just want to know, why do you think you need this money?
And a lot of people think that because these foundations have endowments that they can touch them. Sometimes they can't touch those endowments because they're restricted funds.
Absolutely. That's a very important point. A very important point. They may not have that much unrestricted money to use. Absolutely on point. And that's where a lot of nonprofits are in. So you can apply for that amount of money. So you have to find a bank that is an SBA lender. That bank will work with you to apply. You have to give them some information they ask for. It's a relatively simple application with some backup, and then you may get it. So at this point, it's a loan. Mm-hmm. So it could be, you could have it for basically 2 years to about 1%. But here was what happened with the Cares Act, or with some of the COVID bills with this PPP program. If you use up to 75% to keep your staff employed, at least 75% for paychecks. You can use 25% for rent, for utilities, and that nature. You can apply for forgiveness. So that guidance just came out on Saturday on how these agencies who receive this money can actually apply for forgiveness of that loan if they use it in that category. So just today, there was a debate in the Senate about two things. One is expanding it from using it for 8 weeks. That was the key issue. You had to use it for 8 weeks. So it's what the formula is for. To expand it to 24 weeks or 16 weeks. There's a debate going on. It's exactly what the debate's about. And then literally asking the question, can we do something different than the 75-25 split? Mm-hmm. So that's live today in the Senate. The Senate did not resolve that question. They left. But next week, the House has already promised to raise it again. And then hopefully when the House and the Senate come back together on early June, they'll have an agreement, if not before.
And I think that's a big thing is we're talking about current events. We're talking about things that happen right now. And we talk about how these bills are helping, but then the government is continuously getting in debt. And it's like, I wish I could do that. I wish I could be in $5 million debt and not worry about paying the bills.
Sure, but we're a sovereign nation. It's the nation doing it. It's not you. It's not your household.
I know, exactly.
So it's a whole different way of looking at the economy. So the government does have levers. So just this week, we heard a debate between the Secretary of the Treasury, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, and Congress. The Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Powell, basically was saying he only has so many levers. He has more levers in the Federal Reserve, but he only has so many levers to keep the economy primed. And he basically said, we need to be careful, or we're going to have a massive depression possibly, or some massive disruption in the economy. And he appealed to Congress to do some fiscal stimulus. So not just looking at the money supply, but also looking at fiscal stimulus. The Secretary of the Treasury, again today, left a little note to Congress saying, I think we're going to need some more money. And basically, right now, we are literally paying people to take our money, in the sense of the interest rates are so low. And now is the time, if any time in history, now is the time to pump money back in the economy. Listen, we gave a $1 trillion tax benefit 2 years ago. Why are people worried about that now? why now people really need it. The working class people need this money. People that work in bars need this money. People that work as our agricultural workers need this money. So I think there's an issue where I think that we confuse a certain couple concepts in economics. So I think we need to rethink how that works. And you're right, it's not you leveraging the money, Anthony. Yeah, you'd go in debt if you did it yourself, but we're sovereign. We're a sovereign nation. We can do that and pay ourselves back.
Well, you look at, you got laundries, you got restaurants, any type of small business, looking at this Cares Act. And what happens is when you don't have the money to open up, you can't open. And I think you saw a lot of businesses, a lot of restaurants do carry out to just slash prices just to cover their costs, just to stay open.
Exactly.
And they're getting these CARES Acts. So one thing I think we'll learn is how the public will respond by feeling safe to go to these places.
It's going to take some time for sure. And exactly. My wife and I have two restaurants, two basic restaurants we like, and they've continued to do some type of carry out. So we continue to support them every week because we just need to for all kinds of reasons.
And you should support your local business. You should support your things if you can, if you have the money. Some people may not have the money.
And that's the other side of the coin, right? And that's why we need this fiscal stimulus, because your dollar giving to me is my dollar, and that's what keeps the economy primed.
And I think one thing goes with that is the report came out last week that groceries went up almost 4%. Maybe sure. I think it was between 2 and 4%, but across the board, since 74 or something. So I think but you're getting a higher number of people going to the food bank to go get groceries, to go get food. Mm-hmm. They don't have the money. They don't, and that's putting a heavy burden on the nonprofits.
Sure, absolutely.
And parents are at home. So what are some of the lessons that these nonprofits are learning during the hard times, and what can we get out of this moving forward to help serve the community, help the restaurants, help the local population?
Well, I don't know. So the lessons are basically you have to understand where we are in this trajectory of a disaster. So in immediate, short-term, long-term, and resiliency. We're only in stages 1 and 2. We haven't even talked about long-term recovery yet. So agencies, nonprofits need to think of themselves as how will they position themselves. So there's a couple things that I would recommend that if anyone has a chance to read a book called Forces for Good. It's by Crutchfield and Grant. It's called Forces for Good, the 6 Practices of High Impact Nonprofits. It's a very good book to think through. And these are the 6 major points that, first of all, nonprofits need to continue to work with government and advocate for policy change. Advocacy is not a bad word. It's an important word. You're a voice for people in the community. Your policymakers need to understand what issues they're burning and how you can be of help to that. Second, that we should use market forces and see businesses as a powerful partner. So how do we think through about aligning with the for-profit community and getting the similar things done? We all want our waiters back. So how can we think through that? How we all want our barbers back. So how can we work with for-profit companies and help them think through how to help them and their workers, and how to help them in the community and understand the needs of people? That's an important one. Also, they mention in the book Forces for Good that nonprofits need to take their individual supporters and make them evangelists for the cause. So really engage people, not just by saying, hey, we need $25 or $25,000, but engage them in the mission and in the point. What are we trying to accomplish? And engage people. The third is to continue to build and nurture the nonprofit networks and working with other groups in the community. You can't do it alone. You just cannot do it alone. The 5th major one is to adapt, constantly be aware of what's going on in the world, be resilient and change. You have to change on a pivot sometimes. And the 6th is basically always remember that leadership is something to be shared by empowering others to help you do good. So those are the 6 major ideas that Forces for Good mentions. And I think those are really powerful thoughts that I would encourage any nonprofit leader or any leader to read and see what help they can.
Let's take the one with doing mutual aid with 2 nonprofits or multiple nonprofits coming together for a cause. You know that as demographics change, certain nonprofits, local or national, the donations are dried up because you have more nonprofits being created and more duplicated services. I think that's one big thing that we look at. Or what the need is, you have too many different organizations trying to do the same thing, where when you file for grants, no matter what organization, you got 10 grants or 10 nonprofits doing the exact same thing. And they're all going after the same money. So you see a lot of grant making, the bigger ones saying, okay, you guys got to get together. There's only so much money out there, and the money that's been around a long time, they're unfortunately passing away. The big ones that have donated for years. And then you have this new young professionals donating, but not at the levels that it used to. So how do you deal with that when you have multiple nonprofits doing the same thing in the community?
Well, I think we have to make a distinction between what the same thing means and how do we take
safe services, services.
Yeah. So there might
just
be
for our theory.
Yeah. So think about it. So it takes a lot to help some person and family break out of poverty. So they may need certain aspects. So even though someone's doing literacy and someone else is doing art with kids, it sounds like they're doing the same thing, but they're not.
Correct.
So I think you have to make some distinctions. So the whole point of the theory of aligned contribution or trying to build alliances is, all right, let's find an outcome. We want every third grader to pass the reading test. Why is that important? Because that's a trajectory that the Department of Prisons uses, that by the percent of kids who fail reading in third grade, they know 20 years from now how many prison beds they need. Okay, so let's get the kids to pass the third grade reading exam. So that's a great way to bring together all the people who do kids work or family work. See, it's not just kids. It's mom and dad or moms or grandparents or aunt and uncles. So you might have agencies all looking at doing help for the kids, but what insights do they have? Now, so that's the issue. How do you coordinate all those gifts and assets, all those insights into helping someone to work together for an outcome? So I think that's how people have think about it and do it. And I think those successful communities that the nonprofit sectors don't say, oh, we only need one to do that. No, the successful communities say, what's the insight you give? Now let's find a goal and what you do best, but let's help those kids get through third grade reading. I'm just using that as an example. And lo and behold, I get if you think through that way and look at the examples around the country of those who sat down and solved those problems, or at least made a dent on it, they didn't suppress each other. They use each other's gift in a collaborative way.
And I think you bring up a good point is right now, poverty is high. Right now it was 1 in 5 children that couldn't find food, or that was not getting the necessary nutrition. Now it's 1 in 7. And and I think the families, they said 1 in 10, I think it was. I think I read something like that. But I think we're really in a stage where there's a lot of people that are coming to the front line and saying, hey, we need to do this. And I think you're starting to see that come together when we talk about coming together on grants or coming together on money that's available. I know in our area, the local community foundations, 3 big ones that got multitude of money that they give out, hundreds of thousands of dollars, they created a fund for nonprofits in our area. So any nonprofit that you're looking for, that you need funding, go to your local community foundation. They will have, and I could say 90% of the ones I've seen have a COVID-19 fund.
Exactly, because they want to respond too. They want to be part of the deal.
And I think everyone held up a little bit to figure out where to go. There's a lot of unknowns, and I think and I've talked to several community foundation executive directors and presidents. They're slowing down now, giving out the money. They were coming through and the money and the funds were going to the communities, but now they're slowing down because there's going to be no money left. So they're looking at what's going to impact now, because now we're at the stage where everything's opening up, and that gives us the better routine of what is going to be the services that are needed. The problem I think we have is the unknown of what those services will be.
Totally. And I think part of it is this is the time to start thinking about the problems that we see today weren't caused by COVID. They're exacerbated by COVID. So now's the time to take a little bit of a deep breath and think through what were the inequities? What were the racial, gender, geographic inequities that led us to this point that got exacerbated by this disease? And how can we think through working together with nonprofit, civic, for-profit, philanthropic, and government workers and institutions to think through how can we build a better community when we get out of this? And I think this is a wonderful time for not only just doing service and advocacy, but convening people to really talk to each other, to really think through the next steps, and to listen to the voices of those people most impacted, and try to create a new path out of this. There's going back. There is no going back. But will we choose to go forward or just be static?
And I think you bring up a great point. Is a lot of nonprofits are going to have to reassess what they do.
Absolutely, all of us do, because we had to pivot. It's a disaster.
Exactly. And you're going to have to change with the times, number one. And number two, look at it this way. If you're doing a strategic plan right now, this is the perfect time to do it. you look at it that way because you're going to know what's changing because you're going to get input from the community. You're going to know what the services that are going to be needed. So any nonprofit will be able to expand what they're getting. The only downside is funding. Right now, funding is so hard to come by right now, with a lot of nonprofits pretty much reallocating money to restricted to unrestricted to try to help the communities. So you're going to see, you may see a lot of nonprofits, unfortunately, not exist in the next 5 years.
That as well as for-profits, because I think just things change and things get morphed around. But I think it's also going back to saying, how can you tap into the power of volunteers and other people who are your evangelists? Remember, I mentioned use your supporter as your evangelist, and I use that in a non-religious way, in a sense of like, those are the people that maybe there's some energy there, maybe there's some skills there. I'm sure there are some skills there. Maybe use those assets, figure that out, and how can you use human power as well as social connections, as well as money. So it's money is certainly important. Don't get me wrong. That's very important to any sector. But then how do you tap into that power of knowledge and the power of connections and the power of skills to help people help each other?
Well, look at it this way. You just call them an ambassador to your organization.
There you go.
At the end of the day, they're representing you.
Exactly.
And with this,
and they want to be asked, and people do want to be asked. They do call and say, "Hey, I'll give you a check, guaranteed, but I want to do something else." So that's where you tap into it. That's where you tap into it.
And as a nonprofit founder and executive director, that's we are all volunteers, so we try to do the best we can with what we have. And I think it gives us back to the reality of this will change a lot of what we do moving forward. Sure. And we look at that. We have financial assistance applications available. We're here to help. We want to give out the money to help those families in need for chronically and terminally ill kids. So what, just a side note to kind of wrap this up is we talk about the six, if you want to call them pillars of what we're looking at. What is Catholic Charities doing? Have they done anything different in the last 3 months that they normally would have not thought of because of the pandemic?
I think part of it, there's local stories everywhere. So I think that's where it is. I think we had some very creative people in different parts of the country on how to connect farmers with food, with farm workers, to food banks and to pantries in ways that we never done before, and created whole new relationships with dairy farmers and agricultural workers and meat processors that probably we casually knew, but because of this crisis, we've had a whole new relationships. So I think that is one thing that we learned in the disaster, but now the next step will have to be, how can we rethink food systems as we emerge out of here? So I think that's one thing that Catholic Charities has learned a lot about. The second major issue, and we knew this before anyway, but what are happening to the people who don't have status in this country? the millions of people who've come here without authorization, who have come from other countries, who are not seen, who are not heard. And who are they turning to? They're turning to people like Catholic Charities and Lutheran Social Services, because we're the people that actually care about them, because they're made in the image and likeness of God, and we will continue to speak out for them. So I think those are two major issues that we've continued to struggle with: food and the stranger. So for us, for Catholic Charities, when you go to Matthew 25, when I was hungry and thirsty, when I was homeless, when I was sick, when I was a prisoner, when I was a stranger, did you respond to me? And we can honestly say, absolutely, with a lot of partnerships and a lot of people with us, but we made sure that each one of them were taken care of. You're back.
Yeah, we're back. So, technical difficulties for a couple seconds. I lost my internet.
No, of course.
Yeah, of course. But we'll wrap this up in a minute or two. We were talking about the pillars, and you were talking a little bit about how you guys, it's more of the local stories.
Very much so.
The local
local creativity to solve a problem. I have hungry people. I don't have food. Oh, there's a farmer who has food, but you can't sell it anymore. Wow. Those networks didn't exist. So now we're making them exist.
And I think what you're starting to see is the processing plants are shutting down, so the farmers are going farm to table. So I think that's a big thing of what's going on and how everything is changing locally, because you're going with that local Catholic Charities or a local ministry that's helping out and giving food, and you're seeing longer lines and everything like that.
But then the twist is, so what does it mean when we come out of this? How do we rethink food systems? How do we rethink how the food distribution works? How do we think through that? How do we deal with the internationalization of food commodities, as well as local and regional food economies? So I think we have to start rethinking many of those questions, and this experience maybe will lead us to at least some questioning, to lead us to some insights. And I think I lost you again. So if anyone's out there listening, I think I lost Anthony for the second time. I was trying to be quiet the first time. But I think he has frozen out, and that's the fun of technology. So if you are still listening to me, you have any comments or questions, please type them in. I'd be happy to try to explain or have a conversation. And if not, I will just wait here for Anthony to return. There you go. You're back. So I think it's calling the shot. I think it's time to go.
Yeah.
I think we're getting the message from on high, Anthony. It's time to go.
Yeah, Faith is telling me it's over. But Brian, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight and some of the things that you guys are doing at Catholic Charities for the less fortunate, and what you've seen at the Washington, D.C. From our government and what's been going on from there. So I think it's good to hear from a United States perspective on there are things happening at the federal level with doing all this type of stuff.
Oh, people are very concerned here in Washington about making that happen. Absolutely.
Yeah, you might not see it, but everything's happening behind the scenes.
Exactly.
So I appreciate you taking the time with us. It's always good to talk to you. You're welcome anytime. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Anthony. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. We had a little technical difficulties, but we got through it. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your night and have a great Memorial Day weekend.